us? Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so kindly for joining us. Oh, no problem at all. Welcome to Green Apple Books in the Park. I'm Car Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple.
Yay, Car!
Thank you all so much. Thank you. I'm delighted tonight to welcome Ranjit Hoskote for the release of his collection Icelight. Ranjit is joined by Forrest Gander. Let's give a hand for both of them. I have a very brief introduction, and then we'll get to the heart of the matter. I appreciate you all joining us both in person and online. Hello, online audience. We appreciate you. We are broadcasting from San Francisco. We are on unceded Ramaytush Ohlone land, and we hope that you join us in our pledge to turn land acknowledgement into action by donating either your time or monetary means to an Indigenous organization every time you hear, or in my case, speak a land acknowledgement. Very brief business. Now is a good time to silence your phones if you have not already. I would say picture taking is encouraged, but you can take that up with our poets and see what they think. Please do check out our full event calendar on our website at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great season ahead of us, including the event that you are currently attending. The restroom is behind us. It is available after the event and not during the event for obvious reasons. If you need to know how to access it, please ask me and I am happy to help you. We have books from both of our poets available at the front register. You can find them there. I believe they'd be happy to sign them if you ask politely after the reading. If you've been here before, you've certainly heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you support the writers who put so much work into the making of these books, and then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you are able, we always appreciate it. Also, Ranjit came here all the way from India, so I think you can only do the slight favor of buying his book this year. We're going to hear a little bit from both of our poets today, and then we're going to be followed by a conversation. We'll have an audience Q&A afterward. So our first poet, Forrest Gander, is a cross-genre writer and translator and winner of the Pulitzer Prize for the poetry book Be With. He is a recipient of fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, Guggenheim Foundation, and PEN America, and the author most recently of Not, featuring photographs by Jack Shear. He currently lives in California. Please give another hand for Forrest Gander. And last but most certainly not least, Ranjit Hoskote is a poet, cultural theorist, and curator. This year, he was honored with the 7th Mahakavi Konhi Yala Satya Poetry Award by the Jaipur Literature Festival. His 7 collections of poetry include Vanishing Acts, New and Selected Poems, Central Time, and Hunch Prose. His collection, Icelight, is the reason we are here tonight. Let's give one more hand for Ranjit Hoskote.
So nice to see friends here. Good writer friends. I want to. I'm going to give an 8-minute reading, and I thought I'd start with translation by Coral Bracho. She's a great Mexican poet. She just won the FIL, F-I-L, which is the biggest literary prize for Hispanic and Latin American writers. It's like $160,000. How much does her translator get of that? I'm really happy for her. And the celebration will be in just next week. So here are 2 little poems of hers. This is from a book that I translated called It Must Be a Misunderstanding, Debe ser un malentendido. And it's about her mother's Alzheimer's, which she tracks with the most moving attention and love and not sadness at all. Alzheimer's follow-up. Who is the president of this country? Well, it depends. For some, it's one person. For others, it's someone else. What is this called? I don't know, doctor, because I don't use that. Only you do. How many children do you have? Quite a few. What did you used to do? Now you're going to ask me to draw a clock, right? Did you like to dance? Yes, of course I danced. And did you ever travel? Yes, naturally. Where to? Well, to the same place everyone went. Intuitions. Which is the thread? Which thread is the one that tells our story and lends it substance when there's no trajectory by which to make sense of ourselves? Which thread are we sure is vital? The one that maybe ties together the handful of gestures that comprise us, so we feel we still have control. Gestures that we repeat as certainties, that delineate those certainties which once shaped us, and which now delimit and nail us to our shadows. Certainties whose meaning and origin we don't know, but which nevertheless enclose and protect us like dive helmets or grills, which still let us look through them into the world, that disquieting, incomprehensible strangeness. And then I'll read a couple poems from Twice Alive. This is the UK version, which has a different title. And I thought I'd read a few poems from it that I haven't read before, that I don't usually read. Starting with, well, actually, this one I'm reading for Ashwini Bhatt. Immigrant Sea. Aroused by her inaccessibility, he aches for more of her life to live inside him, watching the breakers, standing so close he can feel heat coming off her wet scalp. What is his relation to this person before him, so familiar and foreign? The way he searches out her face, he searches out himself. Gusts thrash crests of swell, spring grasses twirl circles in the sand, where they stand without speaking. She wants him to know it's all charged, even grass, positive, pollen, negative. So when grass waves, it sweeps the air for pollen. He feels electricity all around, as though the wild drama of the coming storm were already aware of them, foreigners on this shore. Little sapphire blue flowers speckle the dunes. He wonders if he has let himself flatten out into a depthless sheet, like escalator stairs, whether in the end he'll disappear underground without the smallest lurch of resistance. But when her lavish face turns toward him, beaming, the corners of her eyes wind wet, he yields to that excess. He reappears to himself. And I'll finish with this poem, which is another California poem, called Night Surfing in Bolinas. Bolinas, everyone here knows except you, I'll tell you later. Maybe enough light to score a wave, reflecting moonlight, sand reflecting moonlight, and you spotting from shore what you see only as silhouette against detonating bands of blue-white effervescence, when the crown of the falling swell explodes upwards as the underwave blows through it, a flash of visibility quickly snuffed by night, the surf fizzling and churning, remitting itself to darkness with a violent stertor in competition with no other sounds. Paddling through dicey backwash, the break zone of waist-high northwest swell, as into a wall of obsidian, indistinguishable from night sky, diving under, paddling fast, and before I sit, one arm over my board, I duck and listen a moment underwater to the alien soundscape, not daytime's clicks and whines of ship engines and sonar, but a low-spectrum hum, the acoustic signature of fish, squid, crustaceans rising en masse to feed at the surface. I feel an eerie peacefulness veined with fear. After 20 minutes, the eyes adjust, behind the hand dragging through water, bioluminescent trails. Not enough light to spot boils or flaws in the nearing waves, which appear larger, closing in fast. Then 5 short strokes into a dimensionless peeler. 2 S-shaped turns, the kick out, and from shore, your shout. It is cowardice that turns my eyes from the now empty beach. For with you I became aware of an exceptional chance I don't believe in. Objective description only. This mess, experience, the perceived world sometimes shared, in which life doesn't endure, only the void endures. But your vitality stirred it, leaving trails of excitation. I've risen from the bottom of myself to find I exist in you, exist in me. Against odds, I've known even rapture, rare event, which calls for but one witness. And now, let me just tell you a little bit about Ranjit's work, this new book that's out from Wesleyan University Press. Hoskote's new book, Icelight, from Wesleyan University Press, is a reflection of his double life as an accomplished art critic and poet, cultural critic and poet. Not only does this work include ekphrastic poems, which we were just talking about, such as Still Life with Oranges and Fresco, along with references to Caravaggio, California painter Richard Diebenkorn, and other artists, but many of his poems are concerned with shifting perspectives. Such perspectival adjustments are not just aesthetic tropes, but are part of Hoskote's philosophical insistence, I think, on the simultaneity of different viewpoints, cultural differences, and the multiplicities that compose any self, what he calls the prism of this moment. The poems also toggle back and forth between precise description and colloquial philosophizing. Such modulations give the poems a kind of muscular tension, a constant interaction of world and mind. Throughout the book, tonal effects are often understated, subtle, and resonant. Many poems are punctuationless, a strategy that enhances the possibilities of overlap between sentences, multiple readings, productive ambiguities, and so collaborate with the sometimes prismatic themes. This is a book rich in international references to world and art, to self and otherness, and it is various and creative in its formal approaches. Of particular interest to me are the many poems that shift agency from self to world. I think that by relinquishing human control and agency, Hoskote activates the role of the non-human, and this seems to me a radical and necessary adjustment of logos and human-centeredness, a critical aspect of ecological consciousness. Ranjit!
No pressure, I have to live up. But Forrest, thank you very much indeed for all your generosity, and Carr, thank you for having me here. And thank you all for being here in person and online. I'm very moved, Forrest, to be reading with you. I have to say, this is very, very special.
For me.
And I'm reminded of something the Kashmiri American poet Aga Shahid Ali used to say. What he missed when he heard reading in English was the wah-wah that came up from the audience in the context of an Urdu poetry reading. I was impelled at various points when you're reading to just go wah-wah. Wonderful. So I'm going to now read a few poems from this new book, Icelight, and I'll begin with the first poem in the book, which is called Tayset. I thought it might be amusing to open the book with a poem that suggests pause and silence. You'll recognize this as a musical instruction in a score, Tayset. And it does actually refer to certain kinds of portraits, of medieval portraits of saints, in this case a woman saint, so Tayset. She stood under a drizzle of copper leaves, mouth opened in a hymn of praise, voice Tayset, only the chirping of sparrows heard on the terrace above the sleeping town. Be opaque, her sisters had said, because this crust is what will get you through, standing above the chasm opened in the eastern rock, she thought. What if there was no border between flesh and light? What if I had no skin? Of what am I the barometer? I'll move on to one called Obad that goes like this. Rumors of wind, banners of cloud. The low earth shakes, but the storm has not arrived. You pack for the journey. Look up. Look through the doors at trees shedding their leaves too soon. A track on which silk shoes would be wasted. A moon still dangling above a boat. Wearing your salt mask, you face the mulberry shadows. The valley into which you're rappelling is you. This one's called Witness. Speak, earth, in constellations of dewbud and darkening ray, turning to coal and slate in the cold mine shaft where I laid my hand, on cryptic passages carved from tidal night, while voices hurried through the locked air, men with sharpened arrows. Look for him. I've found the seedbed, earth. I wait for you to say, it's time. Let me tell you why you're here. Eclipse. You waited all night for the eclipse. A panther loped down to the lake and swallowed the moon. Another night you thought the wind had called for truce. The moon never crossed the laterite border. A third night, searching in this field where the sky had rained stars, you found the moon buried in a furrow that a yoked bull had measured in loops from left to right to left, turning and returning. Speak, lunatic angel, which was the right way? Was I implement or impediment? All night the eclipse waited for you. I thought I'd read this one called Runner, which is for a composer whose work has meant a great deal to me over the years, a runner for Steve Reich. The rain never lies. It just shifts the names of our seasons. Deaf runner, it's time to outdistance your tribe. Warm your compass on the ring of fire in a fogged kitchen. Write a history of the sky as a steeplechase. Never be that man with a diamond pressed into his forehead who gets on the S-Bahn with a quiver full of arrows, or cycles into a broad river without getting a good look at the shore lights. Lying among dead owls and cardinals, he makes signals in shallow water. Save me, he mouths as the tide marks dissolve from myself. Okay, let me read the title poem actually. Normally, I'm a great non-fan of Latinisms. I tend to insist on, the hard Old Norse and Anglo-Saxon sources of the language, or the possibility of bringing in words from other languages. But I have to say, this one begins with a very heavy Latinism, Icelight, which also is about something that I think we're all haunted by as poets, as writers, which is how do you deal with what is expansive and what is infinite, and how do you try and compress that into something that is, in whatever way it's trying to do this, be a lyric poem that can still extend itself beyond what that means, beyond that page. Icelight. Noctilucence, blue icelight dripping from a cloud. How to be the earth maimed and gloried by that one stroke. In a cave thawing in bare skins by fire glow, I carve wings and a beak in flame red stone, not hunting or hunted by this one with a ridged mane and clawed arrows it will aim to declare nightfall and daybreak, this one that I will buff and never name. I'll close with one called In This Country of Silence.
Starting with silence.
Partly because every country is turning into a country of silence. Mm-hmm. So here goes. And there are three keywords which I think you will catch, and we can talk about it later. In this country of silence, soldiers are burning newspapers. Missing hosts call to give their baffled guests directions to the East Harbor, which fills with the foghorns of unseen ships, while plumbers hunt for silver spoons, hoping their ladders won't give way. In this country of cunning, patrons looking for doors in the wind find that bats read floor plans better than architects. What can I say about this magic show when across the shriveling hours I see the shops in the market bringing down their shutters, and the clouds apologize as a sandstorm rises? In this country of exile, charred wisps of newspapers float across the river. No drumbeat follows, no plucked string shivers in their wake. The sun is a searchlight. The jars in every stall brim with strawberry juice, and this tongue's gone dry, waiting for refugee songs to return. Thank you for your attention.
Well, I have a bunch of questions to ask him, but maybe we should start and see if anybody in the audience wants to ask him something, because it's like burning in you right now. People get shy. All right. Well, I'm going to go with an easy one first.
Okay.
So the poems of both Icelight and your previous book, Hunch Prose, are almost exclusively given single-word titles. Is that a recent development of your art of condensation?
I think it is actually a recent development. I used to prefer not overly elaborate titles, but this is, there's a certain compression and a way of just not not putting too much into the title, just having it be a sci-fi, yes. And then hope that readers will fill in the outlines, respond to the spaces between the lines, because it also goes hand in hand with a certain interest in mise en page. Now, there's the way the body of the text opens up for me. I think that's been a move for me from relatively more classical contained forms to something that seems to extend and expand in different directions.
Oh, that's interesting. Good. Well, I was going to ask you to read one more poem. Jean-Paul Sartre says that vertigo isn't the fear of falling, that it's the fear of jumping, that fear that you're going to jump. In that sense, you have a poem about vertigo. I wondered if you'd read Rock.
Sure. Did you not train in geology? You did, right?
Yeah.
This book has a lot to do with geological references, the hardness of rock and the temporalities that rocks hold out. And there's a phrase in it which is Portuguese. Some of these poems actually are a way of returning to my childhood, which was spent in Goa, which was Portuguese India till about 1960. And when we went to live there, the Portuguese had left about 10 years before.
And the hippies had come in.
And the hippies had indeed come in, yes. So it was very Indo-Iberian, the society, the civilities, public space, and language. Rock. Now call it rock, this edge between your feet and blue, on a scarp thrust up from the seabed, uma grande onda, the nearest house a mile away, the nearest voices traveling overhead through cables, tossed from pylon to pylon. Jump, and you'll be one with all there is to know, the missing piece of the puzzle, joining the unknown. Its lava magnet heart still casting a field through moss and bramble. The rock holds you in place.
Yeah, I like that one. All right, a longer question this time, but making use of the poem that you just read and one that you read earlier. In Redacted, you write a poem that, quote, may never be found, giving us to wonder paradoxically where it exists if it isn't in front of us. In Krishna's End, you reference Abugida, a writing system that's neither alphabetic or syllabic, but somewhere in between. In fact, many of the poems in Icelight, like the poem Rock, which you just read, establish a here and a there and locate the speaker precariously in an in-between, looking, say, from a mountain to the promised land, or standing between an experience and the déjà vu of having, quote, stood here before, unquote, or standing, quote, nowhere, or floating in a riptide, or lying in rising water, mouthing, save me. These persons exist in a kind of worldly purgatory. In Eclipse, for instance, the you is waiting for direction or a sign. He seems to be waiting between his desire and the events that befall him. I wondered if you'd perhaps comment on your frequent imagination of the in-between.
Thank you for that reading. Gosh. I think these poems particularly come from that sense of feeling in between. In the largest possible way, I think it has to do with the sense of politically now being at a time when the liberal, pluralist, more generous understanding of the world that, let's say, my parents' generation had. We've lost that, clearly. And what is on the rise is a kind of flattening, monolithic vision, which just simply diminishes our human possibilities. And what can one do? What can the poet do, for instance? What can one do as a cultural practitioner? I think these are questions that have been crucial to me, and I know to a number of us. But what you said, more, I have to say in a more cosmic sense, this sense of being between the here and the there. I've often thought back to this Sanskrit binary, the iha and the para, the worldly and the dimension that lies beyond. I think that is something that I've been preoccupied with more and more as we go along, especially in the context of the climate catastrophe. In the sense of what are the conditions of our, if you will, mortal existence, and what is it that awaits? What is the afterlife? What is the otherwise? I think it's that kind of radical uncertainty which informs a number of these poems. And then yet you have to map some kind of landscape, some space of belonging.
Beautiful answer, yeah. It's really productive. Other questions I might ask. And let me ask again, anybody else in the audience want to ask anything? John? This is John Shoptaw for the audience listening.
One thing I noticed in both your works you read tonight was interesting use of the second person. And I was thinking about, address, intersubjectivity, but also, a possibility of drama, where within lyric, usually you don't go there, but it's on the verge of drama, the second person. And also, if I is an apertural pronoun, you is a closeural pronoun, and I think a number of your poems closed with lines in the second person. I wonder if each of you might want to say something about.
No, go ahead.
now you're shy.
Paraphrase the question for the Zoom audience.
Oh, they can't hear it?
I don't. It's okay.
Yeah, I think they'll hear the great answer and
Oh my goodness.
intuit the question.
I think that certainly for me, it comes from two problems, if you will, two formal questions. One has to do with the nature of the English lyric poem, which is somehow premised or predicated, we all know this as practitioners, on the I, which for all kinds of reasons tends to be the ground of, I really don't like that word, confessionalism, but there's a certain confessionalist impulse to the I there. Or it takes the form of expressing something that might be, even if properly, it's relatively narrowly personal, but it's not a personal lyric. How do we deal with this question when the I cannot, in any case now, really be singular? We are involved with many. Our fates are intertwined with not only others of our own species, but also with other species. So increasingly over the last decade or so, I've come to think of this I as a multitudinous I, even possibly a multi-species I, or how does one artisanally do that? How do you craft that in a poem? So to me, this is the, if you will, problematic I. Because this comes to me from a life in theory, which is this notion of the individual. Correctly, out of the Enlightenment, we pride ourselves on the security, the rights, the guarantees of the sovereign individual. But it's that individual sovereignty that's also brought us to this space of lack of generosity towards others. So then what might it be to be a individual rather than an individual? So that's a question I have. And about the second person, I think that has to do with my great fascination with Levinas. What do you do in the presence of the brimming face of the other? What might it mean to recognize the other within oneself? So that has a lot to do with this. That's the background to what brings me to this particular interplay.
There was a critique of the you as being presumptive of can you presume to speak for someone else? But I think as our sense of what identity is has been changing, and necessarily so, to recognize that we're multiple, that we're made of a multiplicity of organisms, that we're in a mutuality with otherness, that they merge, that often we speak to ourselves as a you as well, that that the I is a fiction. Oh, my question. Maybe one more. Now I got to pick a good one.
I have a question for you.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right. Oh, no. I didn't ask quickly enough. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Yes. Okay. Something that I've thought about whenever I've read your work. It's your early training as a scientist. It comes through in marvelous ways, as in the way in which you might structure a poem, in the way that knowledge from something seemingly non-literary, another world, comes into the body of the poem and becomes part of its language and extends our language. So could I draw you out on that journey? And what was it like when you first turned towards that, if you will, interdisciplinary way of thinking and writing?
Well, I was always interested in, my mom, when I was really little, read me poetry, and the music of poetry inhabited my childhood. And I had a Swedish grandfather who would stomp around the house reciting old poems. And at the same time, my mom was I was raised by my mother, so it was a very intimate relationship, and she loved, again, her father, the Swedish grandfather, had opened up the natural world to her. So I was interested in that at the same time. I wasn't thinking of them being separate so much, but when I came to study geology, I found that training in geology helped me as a poet, that in geology, to understand anything, you have to really look at it in two different ways, at least, that you look at a mountain and you see the structures from far away, you can see where the folds are and where the thrust fault went. But then to really understand what happened there, you have to look into the shear zone in a microscope. And so that tacking back and forth between the sort of large-scale view and the very particular view became a sort of a natural way for me to think, and therefore to write poetry too. So you mentioned a mutual friend of ours, a dear friend, Aga Shahid Ali, who was from Kashmir, and had a very profound effect on American poetry, and pretty much single-handedly bringing the ghazal into American poetry. And you have a poem. I imagine some people in the audience are unfamiliar with the poetry form called the ghazal, but maybe not. You know it? Yes. So the ghazal is a beautiful oral tradition poetry that is written in couplets, where there's a repeating sound from the first in the first couplet, from the first line in the second line, but it's not at the very end. It's not like an end rhyme in poetry. It comes before a repeating phrase. So you have a rhyme sound and a repeating phrase that only comes in at the second line of the rest of the poems. So I was going to say that your poem, Pachachi, is a variant on the ghazal. I wanted to know if you might read it to us and tell us something about your relationship to that form.
It was actually on my list to read, and then I thought maybe this might require too many footnotes or head notes, some species of notes. But anyway, we are launched already into that discussion. So, it's called Paishachi, which is a rather forbidding Sanskrit word. But what it means is the language of ghosts. Technically, in linguistics, it's the name. It is thought to have been a post-Sanskrit language, but there is not a single. Say again?
Like a pagan language.
A pagan language, yeah. But the fact is that there is not a single extant text in that language except something called the Brihat Katha, the great story, the story of the world. This is a
Only the story of the world.
only the story of the world. Yes, exactly. Yeah, no, nothing ambitious, quite modest. But it's lost, and the only way back that we have to it is much later, actually, Sanskrit work called Katha Sarit Sagar, the ocean of the rivers of story. But early in the 20th century, George Grierson, who founded the Linguistic Survey of India, was a brilliant linguist and really loved India's diverse languages. He decided that he would assign this name, Paishachi, to a language that supposedly Kashmiri was descended from. Because, like many people involved with the great game, Grierson had this idea that Kashmiri had some sort of West Central Asian origin. This, by the way, is not true. It is an Indo-European language closely connected to the languages of northern India. Long story. But why I for years I've actually thought about this is because although Kashmiri did not descend from Paishachi, the situation in Kashmir suggests that it is a language of ghosts that must be resorted to when there is so much civil repression and military repression. And this Kashmir is one of the most heavily militarized zones in the world. It's for decades now suffered a combination of state oppression, militancy, terror, and low-level warfare. Mm-hmm. And in the midst of that, there's been an enormous human and cultural cost across communities, genders, classes. And this poem is dedicated to Muhammad Subhan Bhagat, who was a practitioner of a robust and critical folk theatre idiom for the Bhan Prep. And he was literally silenced during the worst years of this crisis in the early 90s. He was prevented from leaving his home, his musical instruments were broken, and he died of a broken heart. And so this is Paishachi for Muhammad Subhan Bhagat. Who's there? I ask. Unknown hands have rifled through my notes. Not me, says the lamplighter. I can't read the language of ghosts. Pausing in their lullabies, the village women tell me no one's home. They've gone to hunt or be hunted, wearing the iron shrouds of ghosts. I could try and find them who should fear them the most. They whisper in foreign accents, trained in the tactics of ghosts. Our grandfather sits alone around his fire. Deer, bears, wolves listen as he sings into the dark, doing the treble voices of ghosts. They'll need more fur, more teeth, more claws to act on his boasts. He calls up battle, flight, and death, the circular memories of ghosts. In gusts, bursts, and torrents, Gunadhya's stories will flood the ocean. He chants in a forgotten tongue, growling the vowels of ghosts. His words sound like nothing that guests have ever spoken to hosts. This is the language of my people, the language of living ghosts.
Wow. I think you could get a reading just reading that one poem over and over. It would be really effective. It's time.
I actually, we have a question from our online audience.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah.
Tess asks, Ranjit, you mentioned a generous view of English that welcomes words of other languages. I'd like to hear you talk about which languages you choose to write in and the tensions inherent in writing in English in India, etc.
This is
Tess Lewis?
for Tess Taylor, a wonderful poet.
No, it's Tess Lewis.
Oh, it's not. I'm sorry.
Tess is an amazing translator from German and French.
Tess who?
Lewis.
Oh, Tess Lewis. Okay. Thank you.
Tess, thank you for your question. Increasingly, I've felt this pressure of being, well, it's a creative, generative pressure of being what I think of as being a monolingual writer who is a multilingual reader, or the other way around. So the question for me is, how do I bring in these other languages? And it took a while to achieve that, because Anglophone poets in India have for a long time been trapped in a citadel of defensiveness with some reason, because we've had to contend with nativist views which suggest that English is an alien language. It's been there for 250 years, but it's regarded as the language of privilege, the language of the colonialist. All of this might well be true. It is true. But to then suggest that it is not somehow a legitimate form or medium of expression, I think that is rather extreme. But particularly in my generation, I think there's been a move away from this defensiveness to embrace the fact that we live and work in a multilingual society. We ourselves speak and sometimes read in multiple languages. So what does one do with a language like English, which in any case has been historically extremely absorbent? So for me, at various points, it's meant also breaking down the walls inside my head between the person who writes in English and the person who listens to Hindustani classical music. So Bandish lines from Hindustani, from Braj, from Awadhi, these have come into my poems. Portuguese was a language I heard as a child growing up in Goa, so there's some Portuguese phrases that come in. I seem to not speak it very fluently anymore, but I studied German and I read it, and German literature has a very, very strong importance to me. So there are elements of that which come in, sometimes entire sentences or words or translations that get imported into these poems. So this would be my, I hesitate to call it a strategy. It's more of a life project. It's just a way of bearing witness to one's multiple languages. And it's also an invitation to readers to expand their sense of what the language can do. A long-winded answer to a very precise question.
So maybe that's about time. And we have some wine and water and psychedelic drugs over there.
Only for in person.
Yeah, but if you're here in person, right? Thank you so much. This is really...
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, can we give one more hand for Ranjit?
Yes!
Thank you, Cara.
Thank you. Such a pleasure as always. I'm just here to say thank you to you all for joining us. This has been a delight, and I appreciate you being here. And also to our online folks, thank you so kindly. If you have any questions, let me know. And if not, we will see you next time. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.